Welcome, everyone. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate Kay Iver's debut collection of poems, short films starring my beloved's Red Bronco, which was selected by Tyehimba Jess as the winner of the 2022 Ballard Spahr Prize for Poetry. My name is Mary, and I'm the creative director here at Milkweed Editions, and it is truly my pleasure to welcome you all this evening. Thank you for spending this time with us celebrating poetry. I'll begin with a few items of note before turning the mic over to Kay to read a few poems from their book, and then we'll welcome Tyehimba to the screen to join Kay in conversation. First, our collective gratitude to Sign Nexus, who are providing sign language interpreting and captioning services for this event. Thank you for helping us make this event more accessible and for bringing poetry to a wider audience. Milkweed Editions is based in Vide Ota Otunwe within Minnesota Makoche, the traditional homeland of the Dakota people. Residing here since time immemorial, Dakota people still call Minnesota Makoche home, with 4 federally recognized Dakota nations and many more Dakota people residing in what is now the state of Minnesota. Due to continued legacies of colonization, genocide, and forced removal, generations of Dakota people remain disenfranchised from their traditional homeland. Presently, Minnesota Makoche has become a refuge and home for many indigenous nations and people, including 7 federally recognized Ojibwe nations. We humbly encourage you to reflect on the historical legacies held in the lands that we occupy. We are here this evening to celebrate Kay Iver, a brilliant poet who was introduced to us through our annual Ballard Spahr Prize for Poetry, which supports outstanding poets from the upper Midwest and brings their work to a national stage. The prize awards $10,000 and publication by Milkweed Editions to a poet residing in Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, or Michigan. When Tyehimba Jess selected short film starring my beloved's Red Bronco as the winner of this prize, he wrote, Kay Iver's short film starring my beloved's Red Bronco is a gleaming counter-narrative of gender, place, and class. Framed by grief and longing, the poet's vivid and eclectic imagination sprawls through each poem, wrestling with mortality and ideas of transgression. The versatility of images and the bright energy that pervades and suffuses this work is a triumph. I couldn't agree more. Before I turn the mic over to Kay to read, though, I'm honored to introduce both Kay and Tyehimba. And before I do that, I wanted to say just a few quick words about Kay's stunning collection. I worked with Kay to arrive at the cover design, and I wanted to send a special thank you to Pace Taylor, whose gorgeous painting graces the cover. Pace's work reminds me of old film posters, but with a contemporary edge and with trans bodies at the center of its gaze. Fittingly, Kay's book lives up to its title, framing its stories in brief, saturated bursts, alive with the power and color of memory and film. In this way, the book is a powerful act of honoring what cannot be photographed, preserved nonetheless, as it should be. Kay Iver is a non-binary trans poet born in Mississippi. Their work has appeared in Boston Review, Gulf Coast, The Adroit, TriQuarterly, and elsewhere. Short film starring my beloved's Red Bronco is their debut collection. Tyehimba Jess is the author of 2 books of poetry, Leadbelly and Olio. Olio won the 2017 Pulitzer Prize, the Anisfield-Wolf Book Award, the Midland Society Authors Award in Poetry, and received an outstanding contribution to publishing Citation from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. It was also nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Penn Gene Stein Book Award, and the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. Leadbelly, one of his other collections, was a winner of the 2004 National Poetry Series. The Library Journal and Black Issues Book Review both named it as one of the best poetry books of 2005. And I want to note that from a design standpoint, Olio has raised the bar for literary book design. Finally, if you love what you hear tonight and have any questions for our authors, please send them our way through the Q&A box. I will be joining Tyehimba and Kay at the end of the conversation to ask them a few of your questions. We will also encourage you to purchase copies of Kay's book, Short Film Starring My Beloved's Red Bronco, on milkweed.org, and Tyehimba's books, Olio and Leadbelly, from your favorite indie bookshop or through Bookshop. In doing so, you are supporting independent publishing and independent artists. Now I will turn the virtual stage over to Kay and begin tonight's program. Thank you for tuning in, and please help me welcome Kay Iver.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Milkweed. Thank you, Mary, Austin Speaker, and Morgan. And thank you, Tyehimba, for making this possible. I'm just going to read straight through because I don't have a lot of time. And yeah. My first poem I'm reading is called For Missy Who Never Got His New Name. I hear the stars are sentient, which gives me hope for the nitrogen feeding your grass. Even more for the mole ending the day's burrow in your skull. I'm told your atoms are still atoms. Somewhere you're sitting by a pool, picking apart the physics of swimming. In a hallway of a large high school in Mississippi, you're again the sophomore guarding my classroom entrance with a letter like an undiscovered prince. I've resumed my surprise at desire I thought was for cave dwellers. This is where I go wrong. I loved a body you didn't. My younger self wants the word to rebuild rather than stop at the blonde hair, middle part, low ponytail, the impressive manliness with which your hips carried utility denim. I tell my young self to flatten her memory's landscape. Picture two scars liberating a torso, a first name that doesn't hiss. Soon, a Brooklyn apartment. We pretend it finally happened for you. It really did. This is called Who Is This Grief For? My acupuncturist says, why so hungry these days, knowing I'm alone too much? I say, my tongue wants forkfuls of warm white cake, then more forkfuls. She says, what it needs is another tongue. Her needle tries to release a decade-old phone call stuck in the tight meat between my index finger and thumb. I pretend my body's ready. Picture the old receiver's words, Missy and suicide, pressuring into steam. I pretend the needle doesn't hurt. She says, how does that anger work for you? I say, it works because it's mine. 2, I keep thinking how my grief makes you small, how you didn't want to be a God I've asked everyone to love. Didn't want me holding strangers, so many strangers responsible. You had 9,566 days before your last. You held many more objects than a chair and a rope. Faces have softened in your hands. Steering wheels have lived there a long time. But I can't celebrate that, not yet. I can't praise the smooth contours of your nose without wishing it were still a nose, without asking Mississippi where it was that night. My grief is precious. My grief thinks it's you. If I wake tomorrow content with the sheets and square bedroom, where are you? Where am I? 3. My acupuncturist warms my feet with an infrared lamp, turns off the fluorescent overhead. Before she leaves the room, she says, I know you won't stop thinking, but try to think happy thoughts. In 10 minutes, I'm asleep. Some of my muscles relax. Some twitch on the loud crinkled paper. 4, because my grief is asleep, then the news. Years ago, I quit a job reporting government affairs. I no longer have to visit the desks of suits who say I don't exist. But headlines now wait from our phones. Last week, upon waking, Supreme Court allows trans-military ban to go into effect. You died again. I walked again through forests and streets and the stale air of my bedroom. Again, the brain-bound ritual of holding photos of you, a sergeant, backdropped by an Iraqi desert. My neurons careful to keep each muscle's geometry in place. When you were alive and your photos lit up my space, I mourned such need for soldiering. Later, I mourned how quickly the internet lost them all. 5. My acupuncturist says you enjoy this, don't you? She's talking about my grief. I say, who else will? I tried returning to Mississippi, where everyone remembers only what they want. There, I said your name as if to no one, visited your buried bones alone. They would not be blessed by this. I should not want to hold one the way we hold relics. There are so many gods wanting my soreness. I can bruise my forehead bowing before so many statues. I don't drink anymore. Don't binge on fresh-baked softness if it's out of sight. Still, my grief habit says, what's wrong with a little pain? Who else does it pain? I think again of your face that's no longer a face. I don't argue back. Next poem is Boombox Ode. Boombox Ode, enjoy the silence. A landline lets me dance with you. My 1 deck and your 2 deck are dialed to 98.5 FM without an echo. If we speak aloud this miracle of fiber wire and radio wave, harmony could split. From our speakers, soft synth, a bass line, a choir reverbing, a guitar riff that rises and falls, asks and answers. I can't see your movement, the bedroom you're quiet in. Somewhere bodies like ours are pulsing under the same pink neon to the same words like violence break. Torsos like ours are touching and strangers watch only because they're gorgeous. Let me pretend you're back in my bedroom before my mother found us. You've risen from the pine floor and pulled me up. You want me to stand for this. Let me pretend all I ever wanted, all I ever needed is here. Tell me that'll be us soon. Reading this one with me is Kenise Jarbo, poet and essayist. It's called Boy Meets Girl, and Kenise will be reading Missy's part.
Tell me again about the courtyard.
It was August, 7:30 a.m. and sunny. My first day of high school, 1996. I saw you standing with my friends and wondered if you had any in your grade. A friend whispered, he's a tomboy. She said, you played 5 sports, a little overkill.
Who spoke first?
I asked your name. I knew your name.
I handed you some candy.
I took some, saved some.
I walked you to homeroom.
We had many questions.
When did you know?
There were days I thought you stayed home. Then you appeared by my classroom door with a note. We passed several each day. One said, I like good conversationalists. Another, I don't know what to wear to the dance. My mom's on my case about my style. And then another, I'm sorry about Travis. You deserve better. You signed them all, Reese.
When did you know?
We were walking down the stairs and on the landing, my wrist button fell off.
I rolled up your sleeve and looked at you.
Your eyes grew large. They made me think of stained glass at my church, how something pure must be burning through all that blue. I wanted to stay there, standing in holy shock.
You said,
what?
And I said,
nothing. Next poem picks up where that one left off. It's called Fantasy with No Secrets. Instead of staring at each other on the landing, you touch my face and lean in. My mouth opens to soft possibility. I go home wearing your class ring, that cold silver, lab-grown sapphire, exactly my size. The next morning, my mother wakes me, picks up my hand, reads your engraved name out loud. The steep angles of her jaw sharpen when she says I better treat you right. All right. Just 2 poems left. All right, next poem. Short film starring my beloved's living body. Open with the 2-lane highway, the ice truck and the ice. Your elbow resting on the driver's side window. Zoom in on the toned forearm, the goldenrod rushing by. Missy, our audience can see you now. Show them the gas station delivery where a drunk lady screams about your good looks because there's no original way to say a man is beautiful and the lady really did scream. Our audience will believe us and they won't. They'll say people this lovely are only in films. No one with lips this pillowy needs to deliver ice. And here you are, lifting bags and saving up for a weekend in Memphis at the Motel 6. There's no time for dialogue about class or gender. No room to signal that your time with goldenrod is limited. Your time awake is limited. Look how awake you are. How the facial bones move with perfect alignment under the dermis. Cut to the motel, leaving its light on for your red Bronco. Now the motel's dark interior. Now the bed nearest the window where you and a just out of high school date can finally make contact after years of parentally imposed silence. I'm sorry. This film can't access your interior. Your date is the only one directing her memory. Your date is me. My memory is the shower scene, already zoomed in on your face. Open your eyes again. Look directly at me. Hold the camera's gaze through the falling water as if this were our last frame. Missy, this is our last frame. Body is the only good word for body. I'm afraid of home's hunger for yours, but off camera, the interstate is waiting and my lines are, let's go. Okay. Last poem, Because You Can't. Because you can't, I stand in front of paintings a long time and think about the bones once belonging to you and how Egon Schiele could line a body into movement. Because you no longer have a shape, I've made a practice of nearness. A hawk lets me stroke her mid-flight. I let comments land in my mouth when they're small enough. My lover pushes all their weight on me because I asked. They flatten me into astonishment. Because nothing can astonish you. I tempt what's alive by doubting I could love it more. It's a neat trick. When I use it, raccoons visit often. Their fingers closed around mud older than you. Missy, this is me moving on. There's a noon rain to get caught in and many clavicles to behold. I wish you could see this one, tilting across a century. Thank you.
Well, Iver, that was a fantastic reading. Thank you so much for delivering those poems into our ears, off the page, from the soul. That was quite a reading. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you and to Milkweed Editions for coming out with such a strong and distinctive piece of work, in such a strong publication. Iver, can you tell us about perhaps what was the first poem that was written for this, that ended up in this manuscript? And at what point did you think this manuscript had a direction at all, or did you perceive it as direction? When I listen to what's happening in this manuscript, and I think the thing that struck out to me was the kind of the unique quality of imagery. I think the insistence upon placement, and I think I like the fact that it's grounded and rooted in Mississippi in a way, and it's taking from that very particular place, and it's speaking into that place. I like the way that the imagery takes us both into the body and out of the body as well, and into the interstate, and particularly in that last poem. I like the questioning of gender, and the way it seems so very natural to the process of inquiry in the book, and in the process of coming of age in the book. And it's very, very intriguing look at the. So I think that what struck out to me really was the uniqueness and the originality that you brought to the page. But let's start with the first poem. The one, was there a poem that started you off in this direction, that made you say this might go towards a collection?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yeah, the first poem I wrote was for Missy who never got his new name. And I had just wrote it as a letter, a block form prose letter, which is how I often start mini poems. And I had some friends read it, and I had written it after one of my friends and I, friends who in the audience, Caitlin Rizzo, visited Tupelo with me, and we went and visited him and his graveside, and I hadn't been in a long, long time, and I thought this was probably going to be my only poem about it. And I was thinking of quitting my PhD at FSU and just starting a memoir about the story. And I just needed another poem for a workshop the next week, and I had another poem about him for the next workshop, and then another. And then suddenly I needed to finish my dissertation. Like, I wasn't actively trying to write a book, but I had to finish my dissertation in the middle of COVID. And so I just held up in a bedroom, just typing more and more poems from that. And yeah, I never imagined this would be a book of poems. I thought if I told this story, it would be through essays. This looks very different. I mean, this book looks very different than what my dissertation committee saw, but a lot of the original poems are still there.
So was writing this I imagine it was a process of mourning for you as well, and in such a kind of a walk towards a kind of quest for.
Yeah, I think I was already in mourning. I think it wasn't until about 10 years after his passing that it started really surfacing. And part of it was because suddenly trans people were in the national conversation. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't really stuff it, because suddenly I was hearing headlines about people I love and yeah, and it could have just been also a kind of homeopathic, instigation, right? A lot of public catalysts for understanding his death in a different way. Because for a while I thought it was just, a one-off suicide. And then when I understood that this happens to many trans people every year, and that he was part of, a widespread lack of cultural support. And he never had mental illness, for instance, like that wasn't something that he struggled with. And so when I understood that this was probably, certainly part of just an inhospitable landscape that he lived in, that gave the grief a different tone. And it's like I had to grieve him all over again. And that's sort of like how I started writing these new poems. Yeah, and so I was already in grief when I wrote them, and writing just kind of helps me lift it, actually. So after a reading this past spring, someone asked me, like, how do you get in that place where you can write in this way? And my answer to that is often like, I write to get out of that place, because I already wake up in that place. Yeah, and writing helps me loosen the grip of obsession and reliving memories. And I don't want to conflate it to what Toni Morrison called rememory, but I really liked that phrasing of how PTSD can, grip one's mind and body. And writing is one of the very few things that can help me out of it, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Definitely. I really feel the dialogue between yourself and Missy during this, in this manuscript. I really feel a movement, between you two throughout the poems. And they managed to be very, very intimate and also very personal, very also they have a public eye at the same time. They address in a not too topical, but gripping enough. They bring the current political spectrum or political issues into frame at certain moments. Can you tell me, or are there moments in the book that surprised you, or was there anything that happened in the manuscript that happened that you did not plan, that didn't really think was going to happen?
Yeah, in the process of writing it, you think? Yeah, several. I never thought I would write long poems, multi-page poems. That surprised me. For when I first started writing these drafts, I was in the, very deep in the feelings of, inconsolable grief. And it never occurred to me to try to reimagine and do what Bell Hooks talks about when she says, art and journalism are two different things. To be an artist, we reimagine, and to celebrate him as much as I'm mourning him. I don't want that to feel compulsory, because I think compulsory trans joy and pain are not my thing. So I wanted it to feel like an organic celebration. And so I made it a living draft. And I wanted to, for the last poem, for instance, I wanted to wait till I was happy and in love, until I could really be in a peaceful body, a body that, you know, has been healing and has that capacity to reach for joy, enough joy for two, you know. Yeah, it was really, really important to me to write from energy that wasn't performed, or performing a different energy than how I felt at the time I was writing. Does that make sense?
I feel you, especially the idea of performance
Yeah.
versus living
Yeah.
in the poem, you know. That's really a critical understanding, you know, to avoiding the idea of being trapped in a performance, in a perpetual performance, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted it to feel like a real conversation with him. And there's, you know, that can be difficult to do, or difficult to perform. But it's hard for me to perform in general. Yeah, I kind of wear my feelings with everyone. And so I do that on the page as well. And I kind of started doing this as a kind of prayer, you know, to be able to talk to someone I couldn't. I still do that. I still write to talk to people that I can't, either because they're gone or because they're too dangerous to talk to. Yeah.
I know the feeling. I'm talking to dead people all the time.
You're so good at it though.
Well, I really enjoyed the kind of unexpected turns that your poems would take, and I really also I really appreciate the risk. I felt that there's a level of risk that you were taking. I think we were talking before this program started, about even the title put something out there that's very intriguing, but then you have to come with it after putting out a very daring title like that. You know, you have to live up to it, and we get to, you know, and we get to, you know, get familiar with this kind of Bronco, this kind of this old truck space, and the highway it inhabits, and the terrain that it inhabits, and also the mapping of that terrain onto the body. You know, I think that really works. Why don't you tell us, was there a poem that that you thought really went through the most drafts?
Yeah. I had a hard time with Boombox Ode. It was one of the first poems I wrote while I was happy, you know, and so I wasn't sure how to write from that energy. Like, I just gotten my fellowship here, and I loved the community here that we had built, and I was out of the South for the first time, that it wasn't hot. You know? I was just really feeling my happiness, and so I was having a really hard time writing drafts. And so with Boombox Ode, I went through a whole lot of drafts, and partly because I was trying to write about music he loved. Like, he loved 90s hip hop, like loved it. And early 2000s rap, like, just was really into that genre. And you know, and we would like dance with people outside of like recess, like to those songs, to actual boomboxes. Like, you were yeah, and so we had a lot of history there, but we would also listen to songs quietly, you know, in our bedrooms with our phone, you know, with our landlines coming up. And it took me forever, because I realized, I was walking to class here in Madison, listening to Depeche Mode enjoy the silence. And I think that's probably one of, like, it's such a well-written song in so many ways. And I was thinking, oh, go back to your lane, like stay in your lane, just, do Depeche Mode and do the 80s soft synth, the early 90s soft synth. And because that is one of the songs we'd listen to, and from our like shared fantasies and our boom boxes. And when I sent that draft to one of the audience members here, James Davis, he said, why don't you try 2 columns, like one of the Olio poems? He literally, that's like in our email notes. And I just said, I don't know if I could do, I don't have that kind of brain. I mean, I tried it. I tried to like make them both like, separate and, or, standing on their own. And it's like, I'm going to let Tyehimba just do, what Tyehimba does. But it was it would be a good suggestion if I had, that kind of machinery of my brain, but I don't think I do.
Well, form meets function. So whatever's clever, whatever puts the point across, I especially, what was the poem where you have a river, the Mississippi is coursing through? It's the poem, as your
Anthology.
anti-elegy with the river coursing through the actual poem. I thought that was very, very, very intriguing as well. I thought that brought a kind of geography to the page and it brought a division into the work, which was really, really very interesting.
Thank you. That was those. Yeah, I spent a lot of draft time on that one. Many hours getting those spaces just right. Because I'm not that great with InDesign, and I need to figure that out. But until then, it'll just be space on Microsoft Word.
Okay, all right. Well, that would be my request, on the fade out, if I get one. But so tell me about, so now you're in Madison.
Mm-hmm. I'm
Quite
in Madison.
Quite a difference from Mississippi.
It is. Yeah, it's wonderful here. There's water everywhere.
That's and now is your first time out of Mississippi?
Well, no, it is my first time out of the South. So I spent 9 years in Florida, almost 9 years, and then 1 year in Texas. It was a COVID year, so I don't know if it counts. It's still really hot.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not far from Chicago, and that's Mississippi up north. So
Yeah.
as you may find out. But how is it being out of the South and being a writer out of the South now?
I mean, really refreshing, especially in this town. I mean, a lot of, I have a poem, the penultimate poem of the book is called Missy Asks Me What the Next Century is Like, and it's set in Madison, and trans people own businesses here. Our bookstore here, our Room of One Zone, is trans owned.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's the first town I have felt safe in public. I mean, where I've just have felt safe going on a queer date in public. And I don't think that's necessarily because South bad, North good, because we've recently had a lot of news come out of Madison about someone who's like posing as an Indigenous person, for instance. And there's a lot of problems here, just like everywhere. And I remembered, as a kid, where in high school, I went to an evangelical high school. And so we didn't learn much about the civil rights movement, for instance, and they never said Malcolm X's name in high school. But I remembered for a long, long time that he said, if you're below Canada, you're in the South. So, so I don't have, I don't have like, glassy eyes about where I am, but I do appreciate just feeling safe on a sidewalk. for the first time in my life. So
Okay, all right, excellent. Yeah, there's a lot to the regions can definitely change the way we experience our writing. And you mentioned writing in a space of joy as well.
yeah.
I really wish you the best in that pursuit.
Thank you. I really want to with a new project. My new project that I'm writing now is about queer desire, and I want it to feel like it's holding a range. You know, it's starting out with a big wound, because this first book is about how a wound is made, and this other book is about what you do with the wound. And I want it to feel like it's holding the desire across a queer spectrum of an entire queer world, which isn't obviously technically possible, but I want it to feel that way. Yeah, so I will take that as a blessing, a little benediction for this next project. I'll say Tyehimba said so. Tyehimba said you write from joy, and so we will.
Well, I'm glad that you found a place to write that, and a place to have a foundation to steady yourself and write the next thing. That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
Great. So should we open ourselves up to some is it time for some Q&A at this point, or where are we in our program?
Hi. Yes, let's go ahead and move to the Q&A part. We have some really lovely questions in the question box, and those of you who haven't asked any questions, please feel free to jump on and ask some questions. I'm going to start with a question touching on what Tyehimba noticed a couple of times, that space of writing from joy. Kava Akbar has asked, I wanted to wait till I was happy and in love, until I was in a peaceful body that has the capacity to reach for joy, unquote, quoting you. Okay, can you speak on how you knew when you reached that moment? Also, hi, you rule, Kava and Paige.
Yeah, that last poem is just it's a marker of having found that joy in my first, trans friend and lover, after Missy. I mean, that was behind the scenes, that was what was going on. And I think at the time I was, very, I think I'd reached this place of almost like an unsafe happiness, like some happinesses can be kind of like a high, high kind of feeling, but I think if I'd written it this year, it would have had a different tone, right? But I'd written that in, I think, November of 2021. And some of the new poems that I'm working on now, or I've been working on this year, are about that lover in the last poem. And lately I've been taking notes about what I'm doing it with is engaging in another living draft. So taking notes from like a partner, and taking notes from friends, and not just myself, about their desires. And that helps ground me, because my own filter of how I experience want and longing, and even, I guess, in unhealthy terms, like limerence or obsession, has its own particularities. And I want this new manuscript to feel like it's holding more than that, holding more than my own. Because if I can access I wanted to feel like I can access my own joy and someone else's. But yeah, when I wrote that last poem, and the second to last poem, and Boombox Ode, for instance, I was experiencing a different kind of grief. It was like a grief of losing the grief It's like suddenly things feel okay. And what happens when you no longer miss someone, and you're no longer pained by their absence as much as you were before. And I learned that, grief is a way of keeping someone close. And when they felt further away, I was, trying to understand how to or trying to figure out how to, live in a lot of joy, knowing that he can't, and because you can is, I found the healthiest way to do that. The healthiest way to grieve someone after you've gone through the worst of it, and years of the worst of it, for me, is to kind of reverse pregnancy, like reaching for joy for two, because he can't, look at these phenomenal paintings in Vienna. I am going to stand there a long time and take in as much as he would as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and I'm going to use that to transition to another question, which I think you kind of already started talking about with that answer. Freddie Blooms asked, thank you for the beautiful reading. I'm glad to be here. I'm interested to hear how both these writings and this book launch impact how your relationship with Missy has evolved since his death.
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, lately I've been understanding him, as I've started my own medical transition in very slow and subtle ways. Like I just started hormone replacement therapy about 3 months ago. I've been thinking of him as now kind of a queer ancestor, and I've been understanding how the conversations I wish I could have with him, I just have with him. I just have with them as if they're little prayers, like Catholics do with saints, and some other religions that, non-theistic religions. Yeah, not very much unlike that, though I don't want to conflate the non-theistic religious, cultural practices, but that's how I understand how I talk to Missy as now one of my ancestors who I don't feel so far away when I am in new rituals of gender affirmation. It feels like for me a way of one of the many blessings I've had from it is I don't feel as far away from him, as before. But a lot of that is because I don't feel as far away from myself. I know he would have wanted me to be as authentic as possible. So, yeah.
That's a really beautiful answer. Thank you, Kay. And thank you for being so open about all of this. It's a very vulnerable book in many ways. I'm going to move on to Lillian Yvonne Bertram's question. She says, thank you for this beautiful reading and for the gift of your words in this book. I'm curious, what are your hopes for the reader when they encounter, read, and leave this book? What do you want them to leave knowing or understanding about the subjects you write about, but also how you write about them, about your craft?
Yeah, I mean, people are going to take what they will from craft. I think sometimes when you write something that makes people feel very deeply, they miss the craft, or the craft isn't as obvious. What you're doing with language and syntax may not be as forward, as if you were reading a high, quote unquote, high lyric poem. But when I first wrote that first poem, for Missy Who Never Got His New Name, I was writing out of this really deep compulsion to make people love it. I wanted people to love him. I just want people to read these poems and see the beauty that I saw and love what I did for his complexity, not this trans martyr. But this just fascinating and beautiful, charming person with deep flaws, like all of us. Yeah, I know love is a strong word, but that's my highest ambition is to make everyone love him. Kind of silly, but I remember asking when I've had a first draft and my therapist was reading some of them because they were really helping me move this grief. And I was asking her questions, and this was before I would ever been published, and I was still really insecure about my work. And I just asking her many times, like, okay, but do you love him? And she'd say, love is a strong word. But yeah, some people have told me that they have, felt tenderness for him, while reading it. So, yeah, just the fact that, Tyehimba just said his name a few times. I mean, that feels to me like something beyond what I thought possible for this. Yeah.
I if I may interject, I just want to say that I think that you put a lot of energy into crafting these poems so that they would be singular.
Mhm.
And that they would speak to a singular identity. And I think that is an act of love that you committed to the page for this person. And I think that is what people are reading. That's what is transmitting through this manuscript. So I think that's, you said sounds silly, but I think that's a noble project.
Mhm.
That you felt this thing, and that's what we want to do. You want to bring this thing we feel in ourselves to another person. And I think that that's what you are in the act of doing here. So once again.
I think we have maybe time for one last question. I'm really torn about which of these two. Can I throw two questions out at you? And if you have time, you can answer both of them. One of them was from Laura Vale. Did writing this collection have any influence on processing your own queerness and or gender identity? Which is probably, you can probably take up a lot of time with just that one. The other one is from Simon Shea asks, your poems are sublime and so cinematic. Were these poems influenced by any films? So if you want to just take those two and jumble them up, not very similar, but last question.
Simon, I love your poems so much. Thank you for coming. I think one of my favorite probably my favorite American film is Moonlight. I mean, of course, I'm influenced by the films I grew up watching, and a lot of 60s films. I mean, I feel like the cover of the book kind of looks like a 60s movie marquee, which I love. And if you, I feel like Moonlight has when I watched that, I could see that Barry Jenkins had seen, Scandinavian, had really studied the Scandinavian, French, Italian, like so many kinds of tones of film were being drawn into not just the cinematography, but the storytelling. And it was truly phenomenal. I mean, it was already strong on the playwriting of the movie, but I liked how it felt like a fever dream, and I really wanted the book to feel that way. I had some people try to tell me to give the book sections, and I just don't know that it would have felt the same. Like Moonlight, for instance, it does have like 3 acts, whatever, but you know, they do feel very dreamlike, like they're part of like this one dream, and that's very much based in reality, you know. And while there are some themes in that movie that when I watched, I had to, you know, I had to leave the room and come back. You know, I watched the movie several times, and I even saw, I saw, you know, another screening of it when Barry Jenkins came to FSU right after he won. And it was the year of 2017, I think it was that year or the year after, but when I was really deep in this grieving process. And so everything about that film was, for me, it felt like a kind of homeopathy, you know. It was, yeah, that's probably the one of the forefront of my mind, because there's also the mother stuff, you know, like it's got a lot of issues. I worked out a lot of issues watching it. Yeah, very, very, very grateful for that one film, for especially in how I structured, in helping me figure out how to structure this book. Yeah.
Well, we should try to get a copy over to Barry Jenkins if we can.
Oh, we should.
Good. Yeah, I feel like this type of artistic conversation is really important to really believe in, and the way that poets kind of riff on other artists, so important. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much to Tyehimba and to Kay. What a gorgeous, gorgeous reading and an absolutely beautiful book. We are so honored to be publishing it. And congratulations on winning the prize. Thank you to the Ballard Spahr Foundation. And yeah, thank you to everybody. I think we topped out at around 89 participants. So nice crowd. Thanks for coming and watching. And yeah, we'll see you.
Congratulations. Once again.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.